Hello everyone and welcome back to day 2 of the Magnus Carlsen, round 2 of the Magnus Invitational, with a really wild game between Nepomniachtchi and the Maxime Vachier Lagrave, when either of them is playing, you know it's going to be a crazy game, but when the two of them are playing against each other, that can only mean one thing, and let's check it out. So Nepo opens with c4, he goes for the English, and we have c6 by Maxime, going for sort of a Caro-Kann defense against the English. We have knight to f3, d5, and g3 now, preparing to fianchetto the light square bishop. Knight to f6, we have bishop to g2, and now d captures on c4, preparing to now expand on the queen side, if possible, maybe even defend some of those pawns. But first we have castles, and now knight b to d7. We have knight to a3, now going after those pawns, and knight to b6, of course, defending the c4 pawn for as long as possible. White wants to reclaim it, queen c2 goes after the pawn, and bishop to e6, now defending it. And now we go into one of the crazier lines that there are in chess. Knight to g5 challenges the bishop here, now threatens to mess up even the pawn structure in the center of the board. Bishop to g4, putting pressure on e2, and now knight captures on c4. And here we have the very interesting bishop captures on e2, now with a double attack on the rook and on the knight, and knight to e5 now, threatening to pick up the f7 pawn, offering the rook on f1. But the problem is, if bishop captures, first you recapture the bishop, and you're still going to capture here, so that's not really an option for black. So instead, we have bishop back to h5 by MVL, now defending the f7 pawn. And here there are a few games in the database that reach this position where knight to h3 was played, and also there is one game where knight to e4 was played. But here Nepo just plays knight captures on f7, and not with that knight, but with this knight. He plays knight e captures on f7. No, he doesn't. Sorry about that. First, after knight to h5, he played rook to e1. Forgot about that one. And only after Maxime attacked it with h6, now comes knight g captures on f7. And here it's very interesting to see where the compensation for the sacrifice is, but you will see soon enough. Bishop captures, and now b4, preparing to push b5 to attack here on c6 and bust open the position. And the compensation is white has a lot of developed pieces. This knight really putting a grip on the king's position here, and you have many more moves to make before you finish development and castle the king to safety. So a6 preventing b5, and now just a4 by Nepo. And here, the problem is it's not easy to develop. For example, if you try something like e6 to get your bishop into the game, immediately you'll get knight captures, king captures, and bishop to h3, going after this pawn, and black will have a very hard time defending this. And also interesting thing to note, Nepo played all of these moves pretty much instantly, so this is a prepared line from him. We have g5 by Maxime, now preparing to fianchetto the dark square bishop this way, and bishop to a3 by Nepo. Again, pretty much played instantly. We have bishop to g7, and now the black king is ready to castle, but Nepo doesn't allow it. Knight to g6 now. And again, what do you play here? You could ignore the knight, but Maxime decides to bravely capture it. So bishop captures, we have queen captures with check, and now king to f8. And Nepo just continues with b5. So what do you do here? We have knight b to d5, centralizing this knight. B captures on c6. We have b captures on c6, now defending the knight on d5 twice. And rook a to b1. Nepo wants to shift this rook over to f3 to help out with the attack against the black king. So we have queen to d7, preparing to bring the other rook into the game. And now comes rook to b3, as planned. And here we have king to g8, and this is a very important move for Maxime, a crucial defensive move, if you will. For example, if you make a move like rook to e8, let's say you play something like this, you immediately lose the bishop captures on d5, c captures, and now rook to f3 with too many threats for black to parry. Because the rook captures here is a threat, you will not be able to recapture because of this this pin, so this is off limits, and there is no good defense against this. Even if you move the king, still rook captures wins, because now you can recapture, but now just captures, and captures wins the game pretty much instantly, as now it's a queen against the rook. So king to g8, incredibly important move by Maxime. Now rook to b8, rook to f3 will be a bit more bearable. So rook e to b1 now, going after rook to b8 check, and now queen to e8, preventing that while also offering to trade queens. Nepo has to go back with the queen now, and now comes rook to h7. So somehow Maxime will try and get those pieces into the game, and maybe even this rook. So bishop back to b2, and now bishop to f8, moving the bishop and not allowing this trade to happen after the knight moves. So bishop to e5 by Nepo, and now knight to d7, threatening to capture the bishop. And here Nepo could have tried some other moves. For example, bishop to e4 is an idea, going after the rook here, but Nepo decided to just eliminate the d5 knight and grab at least a pawn. So this comes with check. C captures, queen captures with check, and now e6. Blocking Nepo's queen has to go back, and we reach this position after rook to f7, where Nepo is up a pawn, but he is down a knight. And you know, there is a saying in chess that Fischer is Fischer, but a knight is a knight, and here Nepo will have a very hard time playing against this knight. So he goes for bishop to d6. He doesn't want to give up bishop for a knight now, so he offers a trade of dark square bishops. We have bishop captures, queen captures, and now queen to e7. As MVL is up a piece, of course, he would very much enjoy trading queens, which Nepo, of course, declines. Queen to c6, and now rook 8 to f8, going after the f2 pawn. So now, if you don't want to play something incredibly passive to defend that pawn, which you shouldn't do, you have to play extremely active moves you've sacrificed for the attack. So rook to e3, he goes after the e6 pawn, but Maxime just captures on f2. He doesn't care about e6. We have rook captures on e6, and now queen to f7. And now you have to really figure out what to do here with white. Rook to g6 seems like a reasonable idea. However, after king to h7 or even king to h8, you can even give up the pawn once the king comes to g7. There's not much you can do to continue the attack, and rook to f1 is coming. So Nepo instead tried queen to e4. Now he might have some ideas here if he can get out of this rook to f1 threat. Maybe you can go for something like rook here, or maybe rook to g6 in the future to try something. But it's very hard to do. Here rook to f1 actually wins for Maxime, but he was very low on time, and he didn't feel like calculating it. For example, of course you don't capture, queen captures would be made, you have to move the king. And then after queen f2 check, you go to h3, and now it's a winning position for black. Knight to f6 is the best here, but even if you're not sure, you can just trade queens here and, well, just enjoy an endgame being a piece up. But instead, we have knight to f6 by MVL, first bringing the knight into the game, and now queen to c4, not allowing the queen to move, as Nepo would have a lot of nasty discoveries here. So rook to f3, now your rook is also under attack, so rook to f3, we have king to g2, attacking it, and the g4 now, just cementing that rook on f3. We have rook b to b6 now, and now king to h8. So the king unpins, now the queen can move, you won't have any discoveries here. And here Nepo should probably play rook captures on a6 and just hope for the best. He now has a passed pawn, maybe he can somehow trade queens and play on that passed pawn, but it would still be incredibly hard because queen h5 threatens queen h3, king g1, you're going to switch the queen to f5. Again, it's going to be incredibly difficult to defend. But it perhaps was the best try. However, Nepo went for h3, and now you are Maxime here. There is actually a forced checkmate in 8 here. And when I say forced checkmate in 8, I mean 8 with the best possible defense from white. Of course, white is allowed to defend poorly. So feel free to pause the video and try to find this idea while I give you a couple of seconds. So for those of you who were able to do it, congratulations on spotting the rook sacrifice with rook captures on g3. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, what I just said, so rook captures on g3, and you have some options here. For example, if you capture the rook, which is something you might consider, then comes knight to e4 with check. king goes back, let's say king to g2, although you could even go to h4, but we are going to cover that. And now it's just queen to f2 with check, king h1, and knight to g3 with mate. And if you don't go with the king after knight e4 check, if you go to h4, it doesn't really matter. Queen to f2 check once again. You're gonna go to h5. Now comes queen to f5 check. You have to go either down or up. Up the board doesn't really matter. And now it's queen to g5 again with checkmate. So after rook captures on g3, you might try declining it, but then black just continues sacrificing. Of course, you can decline once again. Rook g3 check, you could decline once again, but now there's no h pawn. Kind of reminiscent of the Steinitz versus Bardeleben game, where you continue sacrificing the rook until you eliminate the h pawn. And now queen to h5 with check, forcing you to capture. And now finally knight e4 check, captures, or doesn't really matter, and queen to h3 will be mate as the rook prevents the king from reaching the f file. So it was in the position, however, Maxime low on time, he didn't want to calculate all that much. Instead, he went for knight to h7 first, just not allowing this to come with check, so you don't really care about the h6 pawn. Next, you're going to go rook to f2 check. So here, Nepo, without any options, decided to trade queens and take this into an endgame. So check, queen g7, not queen f6, obviously, queen captures on g7 with check, king captures, and rook e7 check now. King to h8, and then now comes rook to e2. You don't have time to grab a pawn as you're running into mate here. After king g2, rook f2 is checkmate. So rook back to e2 by Nepo, not allowing this check, but now g captures on h3. King captures and rook 3 back to f6, not allowing the capture of the a6 pawn. So rook b7, hoping that maybe you can get rook to e7 in, and now rook to g6 instead. And here we have rook to e7. If you go for rook to a7, if you go for rook to e7 right away, then just knight g5 check, and the knight will always cover the h7 square. So rook to a7 instead, but now knight g5 with check. Again, king g2, and now rook g to f6. Just again, with full control of the f file. And keeping an eye on the a6 pawn. So d4, we have rook 8 to f7 now, offering a trade here, rook 8 check, and now king to g7. And Nepo continues to push his only pass pawn. So d5, we have rook to d7, putting the rook in front of the pass pawn, and Nepo does the opposite. He puts the rook behind the pass pawn. Rook f to d6 goes after it, and now just g4. So if the rook is if the pawn is captured, then Nepo can grab the a6 pawn. So knight to e4 first goes after the rook, rook to c2, and now knight to f6. You still don't want to capture and allow this capture, so just knight f6 goes after the pawn with the knight. But now rook to c6, forcing this capture of the pawn. Well, you might even consider capturing on c6, but it gives a white the passed pawn, so might not be all that pleasant. So instead, rook captures here, and now rook a captures on a6. And at least now Nepo has a passed a pawn, so perhaps it is possible to play this. But rook to d2 with check, king g3, and now Nepo runs into the very unpleasant rook to d3 check. King f4, we have rook to f2 with check. King has to go to e5, and then now comes rook to e2 with check. And with rooks having full control of the d and e file, the king has to go back, but now you run into knight to d5 check, and here it was in this position on move 58 that Nepo resigned the game, as it is mate in 1 on the next move. Of course, you see it after king f5, rook to f3 will be checkmate. So Nepo did not allow mate to be on the board, and after knight d5 check, he resigned the game, which is a shame for those who play the fantasy chess league, and they said that there will be a chess mate on the board, but you know, you can't have everything. So yeah, that's the game. Really exciting start of the match between the two of them. Really crazy line. Nepo, first time ever that sacrifice on f7 was played, but it is what we expect from Nepo, and Nepo always delivers, whether he wins or loses. So great game by both of them. Great start by Maxime. We'll see if Nepo can get back into the match. I would like to thank David Cheslock, Mr. R, Leon Mushan, Shmuel Bashan, and Mark Magnier for your contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing the coverage of the Magnus Invitational. So thank you all. I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day.